On the 19th of May, 1966, at a federal fish laboratory in Stuttgart, Arkansas, a scientist called Fred Meyer and a colleague named Kermit Sneed got a 3-year-old female grass carp to spawn. Nobody in America had managed it before. The Fish and Wildlife Service had imported the fish 3 years earlier to eat weed out of ponds, and breeding them was the point of the building. It worked. Wastewater from that laboratory runs 3 miles into Bayou Le Gros. Bayou Le Gros runs into the White River, and the White River runs into the Mississippi. 4 years later, somebody noticed the fry was small enough to swim through the screens. I'm Arthur Beckett. I have hardly ever found a story about an animal getting loose that did not turn out to be a story about paperwork. There are 4 of these fish, and they arrived by 4 different routes, which is the first thing the phrase Asian carp hides. Grass carp came first, in 1963, imported by a federal agency. Stuttgart was not the only door. A laboratory at Auburn, in Alabama, spawned them the same year from separate Taiwanese stock, and Arizona had imported its own from Hong Kong. But Stuttgart is the one on the Mississippi. By 1972, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission had put 290,992 of them into 54 ponds and lakes in that state. That figure comes from one paper, working from an unpublished agency ledger. The first stocking into an open, stream-connected water was December 1971. It was purposeful and it was legal. Silver and bighead carp were imported by a private fish farmer in Arkansas in 1973. Within a year, all of them had been handed to the state, which spawned both species and studied them for a decade. And then the federal government paid to put them in sewage. The Environmental Protection Agency funded research through the 70s and 80s on using these fish to clean wastewater. 6 treatment lagoons at a services center in Benton, Arkansas. More funding in '82. And a state program that stocked silver carp into the sewage systems of small towns that could not otherwise meet federal water quality rules. 12 municipalities received them in 1989. One more, because it is the one I keep thinking about. The state stocked silver carp into a lake it owned in northeast Arkansas to control algae. The fish did not control the algae, so they drained the lake into the St. Francis River, which is a tributary of the Mississippi. Now, everyone will tell you these fish got into the river when a flood broke the ponds. It is on the National Park Service's own page. It is on California's. It is in most of the news coverage. Flooding breached the ponds, and the carp got out. Here is the whole documented basis for that. In April 1994, high water flooded hatchery ponds near the Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri. Several thousand bighead carp and 30 or more black carp went into the Osage River. That is one event, in one river, and the owners of the facility denied that the black carp had ever escaped from it. The citation in the literature is the word anonymous. Set that against the clock. Wild grass carp were being caught in the Illinois stretch of the Mississippi in 1971 and reproducing there by about 1975. Bighead carp were reproducing in the wild in Missouri by 1989. Silver carp were being pulled out of Arkansas rivers in 1975, 2 years before anybody was farming them commercially at all. The flood is real. It is at least 19 years late, and probably 23. I want to be careful here, because the paper that assembles all of that has a fingerprint on it. The standard reference for the introduction history is a 2011 review. One of its 5 authors co-owns a fish farm in Arkansas and spent 7 years as an Arkansas Game and Fish Commissioner, 2 of them as chairman. Its thesis is that public agencies, not private fish farms, opened the door, which is the account the industry would want written. Now the complication, because it cuts the other way, and I am not going to leave it out. 2 of the other authors worked for exactly the bodies the paper blames. One at the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, one at the Federal Laboratory in Stuttgart. If this is a whitewash, it is a strange set of people to have done it. What I can say is narrower. 2 of the paper's most specific claims, the 290,000 figure and the lake drained into the St. Francis, rest on unpublished records held by the authors. Nobody outside that room can check them. Everything after this is an attempt to close a door that was opened in 1900. Chicago's sewage used to go into the Chicago River. The Chicago River went into Lake Michigan, which is where Chicago got its drinking water. So the city dug a canal and reversed the river. On the 2nd of January 1900, the water started running the other way, down the Des Plaines, into the Illinois, into the Mississippi, to the Gulf. It moved the typhoid downstream. It also cut a permanent channel through the continental divide between 2 of the largest freshwater systems on Earth. There is now a fish coming up it. The first attempt to stop it was a demonstration barrier, switched on in April 2002 near Romeoville, 1 volt per inch. It was built as a temporary proof of concept. Before the decade was out, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission was saying publicly that it had passed its expected life, was failing, and was the only thing in the way. The permanent replacement was late. It should have come up in January 2009 and did not, because the cooling pipes were defective. When it did come up in April, it ran at quarter strength. Which brings us to December 2009. The new permanent barrier had to be switched off for maintenance, and nothing had been built to cover it. That left the 2002 demonstration unit, the one the Fishery Commission had been calling past its life, as the only thing running. So they poisoned the canal. 5.7 miles of it, over 7 days with rotenone. 450 people from federal, state, local and Canadian agencies. Around 100 tons of dead fish, lifted out by crane and taken to landfill. They found 1 bighead carp. The treated stretch ran downstream from the barrier. The fish turned up 500 feet above the Lockport Lock, and Lockport is itself several miles below the barriers. It was on the riverside of the door the whole time. It had never been past anything. 5 months later, they did it again, over 2.5 miles of the Little Calumet at the O'Brien Lock. Over 100,000 pounds of fish, 40 species. No carp at all. 33 days after that, a commercial fisherman working under contract to Illinois pulled a live bighead carp out of the northwest corner of Lake Calumet. 34.5 inches, 19.5 pounds. 6 miles from Lake Michigan and well above every barrier. They netted and electrofished for weeks afterwards, up the river toward Lake Michigan. Nothing else. The obvious answer was more voltage. In March 2011, the Corps' own laboratory work tested it. At 2 volts per inch, the barrier stopped fish over about 5.5 inches long. It did not stop fish 2 to 3 inches long. The recommendation was to raise it. They raised it. 2.3 volts per inch, 30 pulses a second, from late that year. Exactly as the study said. It has run at that setting ever since. And a barrier is only a barrier if the water in it is doing what you think it is doing. If this is the sort of thing you want more of, subscribe. I only make these when the record actually supports them. And then the boats turned out to be the mechanism. In 2016 and 17, government scientists measured what happens to the electric field when a tow goes past. The voltage gradient falls by up to 88%. Schools of juvenile fish cross the barrier upstream in 89.5% of trials with a downbound tow. A separate study found small fish get caught in the gaps between coupled barges, stay there, and are carried at least 15 kilometers, through locks and through the barriers. In June 2017, a silver carp was caught 9 miles from Lake Michigan. The autopsy said it was 4 years old and had spent about a quarter of its life in the Des Plaines watershed, and it could have hatched anywhere in the Illinois or Middle Mississippi system. Barge entrainment and somebody simply carrying it were both on the table, and nobody could choose between them. They searched 13 miles of waterway, handled over 20,000 fish, and found nothing else. A third came out of Lake Calumet in August 2022, a silver carp of about 22 pounds. 3 fish above the barriers in 16 years, and that is the complete list. Meanwhile, the fishing, about 50 million pounds taken out of the Illinois River in 15 years, with the agencies claiming a 95% density reduction in the upper pools. In 2022, the state renamed the fish copy and tried to build a market for it. That has not worked. Dockside prices run 9 to 30 cents a pound. The economists who looked at it concluded the scheme needs a subsidy of about $1.13 a pound on top of that before it works at all. The current answer is $1 billion gate. The Brandon Road Interbasin project sits at a lock on the Des Plaines at Joliet. It is a layered gauntlet, machinery to flush fish out from between barges, a bubble curtain, an underwater acoustic deterrent, an electric barrier, a flushing lock, an engineered channel. About $1.15 billion. It is designed, item by item, against the failures I have just read you. On the 11th of April this year, the Corps awarded the contract for the leading-edge deterrents, $113.8 million. In July, it issued a stop work order on that contract, citing administrative review, and declined to explain further. As I write, it has not been lifted. 3 weeks after that, state crews in the Marseille pool pulled out hundreds of silver carp 4 to 6 inches long. 80 miles from Lake Michigan, the furthest upstream juveniles have ever been found, which means a spawning happened there or above it. 4 to 6 inches is bigger than the size class the barrier was proved not to stop. That is the only comfort in the sentence, and it is thin, because they were 4 to 6 inches last week. Now I have to give you the other half, because the panic has been running for 20 years, and some of it does not survive contact with the numbers. The figure everybody quotes for what is at risk is a $7 billion Great Lakes fishery. The Fishery Commission had it on a fact sheet with no citation attached to it. In January 2025, it commissioned the work again, and the answer came back $5.1 billion for recreational fishing across 8 states and Ontario. The Commission's own explanation is that the method got better, not that the fishing got worse. Measured damage so far is smaller than the rhetoric by a factor of several hundred. A study of invaded against uninvaded reaches found no statistically significant effect on commercial harvest. The measured recreational loss is a little over $10 million across 10 years in the worst stretches of the Illinois. Public spending on the problem passed $592 million by 2020, and on the Wabash, the fish everybody says the carp displaced, gizzard shad, collapsed before the carp arrived. The authors concluded this may be less a hostile takeover than an animal moving into a room that was already emptying. The best food web models for Lake Erie put adult walleye down around 9 to 12%. Adult yellow perch come out slightly up in most of the runs. The catastrophic outcomes: walleye down a third to a half, perch down further, turn up in 2% of the simulations, which would be a reassuring place to stop except for one thing. While all of that was being argued about silver and bighead carp, the first of the 4 was already inside. Grass carp, the ones from Stuttgart, have been reproducing within the Great Lakes Basin since at least 2011. Fertile wild fish in the Sandusky River in Ohio. Eggs confirmed in 2015. Larvae in the Maumee in 2018. 3 Lake Erie tributaries spawning, and a management strategy written on the assumption that they are staying. They did not come up the canal. Nothing at Brandon Road could have stopped them at any price, because that is not the door they used. They came the way they have always come, which is that somebody put them in a pond. 7 or 8 states still permit the stocking of fertile grass carp. The people compiling the figures could not agree which. When they asked those states for records of what private stockers had put in the water, 3 of 8 could produce any. There is a $1 billion gate on one door and no lock at all on the other. There is one of these that has actually worked, and it is worth knowing what it costs. The sea lamprey came into the Great Lakes through the same kind of canal and gutted the fishery. Since the 1950s, a binational commission has held it down with a chemical applied to about 200 tributaries, plus barriers and traps. Roughly a 90% reduction, sustained for 60 years, at about $25 million a year. Then the pandemic stopped the treatments. A quarter of the planned streams were done in 2020, 3/4 in 2021, and the disruption ran into a third year. The counts went up. It took until last year to get them back to the pre-pandemic average, and 4 of the 5 lakes are still above target. It is not a wall. It is a standing order, and nobody has ever been allowed to stop paying it. 2 men in Arkansas got a fish to spawn on a Thursday in 1966 because a federal agency had asked them to. It worked. The water went out of the building the way water does. Everything since has been the other half of that decision. The other half has cost more than $500 million and is currently under a stop work order nobody will explain. The bill for a decision like this rarely lands on the desk that made it. There is a government that once bred moths by the billion to kill a cactus the size of a country. It worked. That is the part that should worry you. If you want more stories about the decisions that worked just well enough to haunt everyone later, subscribe to the channel. For now, thank you for going up the canal with me.